Councilman Ward.
I think it shows that they're on, Mayor.
Well, I see Councilman Clough, empty chair. I don't see.
Oh.
Councilman Ward, are you on, Councilman Ward?
I went down and turned on the computer for Councilman Clough just in case he needed it, but I haven't seen or heard from him.
Okay, I see Doug's on, it looks like. Is that right, Doug, are you on? Well, I'd like to get started anyway. We'll have to let them just join us when they get here. Welcome to our Public Electronics Special Workshop Meeting, April 29th, 4:30 p.m. Again, we are broadcast via YouTube Live. You want to check the link, washingtoncity.org/meetings. I would like to entertain a motion to approve the agenda as outlined.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Second, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we'll move on. Discussion and review of the 2020-2021 fiscal budget. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So my thoughts tonight were, of course, that this will be much in the hands of the council to continue their discussion. There are a couple of items, of course, that we have not got to, have not had time to discuss. And so I want to make sure that we have time for that. We didn't field any questions you might have with the capital budget. I'll pull that up in a minute and see if anyone has any questions with respect to that. We do have our department heads on with us this evening. I appreciate them. Second of all, any questions on the operational side of the budget. And then we still, well, what I would hope that we could do tonight, it doesn't have to happen tonight, but we're getting closer and closer to the time when it has to happen. And that is getting clear enough direction from the council on kind of where we want this tentative budget to sit. And that would be as it relates to personnel, as it relates to any questions that we need to resolve with you. And then it would be wonderful tonight if we could get to that point where we then can take your recommendations, go back, cobble that tentative budget together in preparation for the 13th, which is required for us to have that before you at that point. And so that's how I'd like to proceed, Mayor. If unless the council or you feel otherwise, is we could first start maybe just talking about any questions or discussion about the capital budget. And again, if there are any questions, we have department heads. I'm going to try to pull that up here and so others can see.
I think that's a good way to again, I'd remind you to keep yourself on mute and then raise your hand on the hand.
Okay, so give me just a second. I got to move this toolbar. All right, so I don't know if I'm streaming yet that.
I can see it.
So you can see the 5-year capital?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So anyway, I guess at this point, I would just ask, and again, primarily our focus is the 2021, so the first column. If you have questions with respect to those items there, but of course we can talk about any of it, but we're probably going to be more in a position to talk about the 2021 capital budget. So while you're thinking about that, again, a lot of these, the sources of revenues are impact fees. And these would be impact fees we'll have collected in most cases to this point. Again, we like to continue with some of our capital projects. One, because they're still necessary because of growth. Two, we do have requirements to spend our impact fees within a specific statutory timetable. And three, by the continuation of building and putting money back into the economy, we do continue to stimulate the local businesses, contractors, and that would be working on our projects here. So,
Councilman Staley and then Councilman Coates.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Manager. I just wanted to make more of a comment than ask a question. We seem to have a pretty good discussion during our last meeting on the capital projects. I know we covered a lot from power and the various items from Public Works. I personally really appreciate the projects that have been brought forth by the department heads. I feel like I can't see anything that is not a need commensurate with growth. So I personally don't, at this point, really have any other additional questions unless there's been anything that's changed between the last meeting and this meeting.
I'm not aware of any changes, and I know we've talked about other capital projects. I don't want you to all be concerned about those. These are the this is the current capital projects. So for other things like parks and other things that we've had some discussion about, those are continued to have some discussions. And if in the event the council wants to approve those as we come up with funding sources, costs, and those type of things, we can get those in the capital budget. This is not a one swipe and we're done type of a thing. This is just the capital budget as as our department heads have forecasted and then moved through with impact fees or other things. So thank you, Councilman, but nothing has changed that I'm aware of.
So, Manager, the question I had was in the leisure services. I like what's put here. And you just mentioned that don't bring up the other parks, but I know that the past council increased the impact fee for the parks, and they were very specific to certain parks. And I don't see those parks in here in the 5-year plan.
So the and I need to get this out, and maybe I can ask Barry to do that. I think Barry's on with us, but I need to get out to all of you. If you don't have it, I think some of you do, but just to get it quickly to you, I need to send out the new capital facilities plan that we had redone this last year that did generate that increase in impact fee. So how that worked is, if you remember the first top items, and I don't have it here real quick. If I did, I'd pull it up. I'll look for it. But the first top items, of course, were just dealing with the debt service of the existing parks. And so those are a fixed item. So those you wouldn't see in the capital, those you would have seen in the capital sometime past. You do have some trail money that was set aside. That's where you'll start to see this canal trail. And again, some of that's accrued already as well. And then the other thing that was left over was, it was fairly general on additional park, and it wasn't a full funding with the existing impact fee. And it didn't even specifically articulate which particular park. It just said additional park space. I can't remember how it defined it, but something like that, Councilman. So that because
I thought they identified the 2 parks that were currently built.
Yes.
And then it identified a park in the fields. And it was for a regional park. It didn't get specific on where. I don't ever remember it talking about the parks building and the Veterans Park Phase 2.
Yeah, well, those don't necessarily need to be, those are the reason the park building, for instance. And Barry can.
It's a maintenance building, right?
Well, it is. It's still, but I don't know if that's actually in, not all these things are impact fees. So some of them are accrued funds, some are one-time funding. You had, and those type of things. So Barry, can you wade in and talk about the parks building, and if that was part of the of any capital facilities plan, or if that was just, to be honest with you, the parks building's been on there for a number of years and we haven't been able to fund it. So that's why it keeps getting moved forward. But you're right. That's not in the current capital facilities plan. It's not intended to be paid out of impact fee money. Barry,
can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
So the reason those are on there is we have to have them on there, just a placeholder, and we move them just so that we, down the road we can get funding. So that doesn't mean that we have to do those right away, but they're just in the plan in the future that, eventually we're going to need a park shop, but that doesn't mean we're going to spend that stuff right now.
And I don't.
We can adjust those and push those off. That's usually that. As a matter of fact, I just did that. I just pushed those off for. I just increased a year on some of those, just barely, when I redid that. But they will be later on down the road, some of those. But we do have to show them on there.
So do you have an anticipated for the future park that we've been talking about, the park/bike park, pump track, whatever it ends up being?
Yeah, that would
Do
be,
we
that, well, we'd
I
have,
just hope it's not past 2025, I guess is what I'm saying.
no, that would be the next priority, really. You know, these ones that we have for this year, they're under construction right now, and those are on the list. That field, which is in the park, which is in the fields, would be that one. So, yeah, that's a priority.
Barry, can you answer on the canal trail? Is this accrued funds that we have? And I'm talking about the 2021 column.
Yes.
Okay, so that one's there and that's been accruing. Has that been a capital facilities plan?
Yes, that's in there.
Okay. And then I need to get out to you. Barry, can you send over to me to get to the council, that last capital facilities plan, and we can.
The one that Sunrise did?
Yeah, the one we just got completed that.
Yeah,
generated-
it's also on the website. It's on our,
Let me stop here and I'll pull that up real quick.
And after Councilman Ivy and then Councilman Staley have questions. Councilman Coach, you down, you still have questions?
And we can come back to councilman going forward.
No, I'm good. I think we just need to, as soon as you can find that, Roger. So,
That noise.
My computer's going crazy. Mayor, my question was, city manager, relates to the priority. I was just wondering who arrived at the priority, whether it was the department head or if that's kind of a citywide priority, or just kind of talk a little bit about the priority, please.
So the department heads determine needs, but the capital facilities or the capital budget is approved every year. And so we've had discussions about it with every council. And if the council has felt that one item should be higher than the other item, then they can adjust it. That's what we do now. A lot of times, again, we haven't done a lot of that because a lot of times it's all been driven by the capital facilities plan, most of it. And so we don't have a lot of latitude there, but that's why we do it. So department heads identify needs. We insert capital facility items, and the council looks at the capital budget every year and says, I like this one, or maybe we need to move that. And we've done that in times past based upon council input.
Thank you.
Councilman Staley?
Barry, just as we continue this conversation on parks and leisure services, can you give some context to the last couple of years, the number of parks that were built, the cost and the acreage? The ones that come to mind that are newer are the Shooting Star. I think that was impact fee or impact fee credit. There was a Green Spring Park expansion where the prior council approved to use RAP funding to grass in a detention basin. There's the Canyon Park and Hellhole Trailhead and the Boilers Park that's in process. Can you just give some context in terms of where we've been as we look forward to what capital projects are coming? You know, the number of parks, the approximate cost and approximate acreage.
let me get on here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
You can hear me?
yes.
Okay, so Shooting Star Park, which we just opened, was 5.5 acres, 1.3 million. Green Spring, the expansion, which it's all grassed in now. We're doing the final punch list on Tuesday of next week. We've already started that punch list, and everything should be completed by then. So we're almost taking that over. That was just a little over $300,000 project. The Canyon Park. So acreage, Shooting Star 5.5, Green Spring, that detention basin would probably be 2.5 acres. Mainly just grass and stuff like that. So it was a little bit cheaper. The Canyon Park was also, it was a little over one, what, close to 1.5, 1.3, 1.4, somewhere in there, million. A little over 1.3. That's, Craig, you can help me out with this, or Councilman.
Yeah, that was 1.3.
1.3.
Canyon Park was
and
1.3.
it ended up being total with the things we did with the trail and everything, about what, 2 acres?
No, it was 1.5
Okay,
acres.
1.5. And then right now the boilers is about 2.5, a little over 2.5 with the property we picked up closer to 3, and it's about 1.5, somewhere in that range, 1.5, 1.6. So those are the ones we picked up. Those are the acreage. We're looking at about 13 acres within just the last little over a year. By the time we get the boilers done, of park property that we've added acreage.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So Councilman Coates, this is kind of where the impact fee schedule was put together. So there was a total of 12,382,000 through that period of time, which is, I believe, about a 5-year, 7-year period. I'm looking 2025 or 2026. Looks like you're a year out. You got some existing debt services there down at the bottom. We got that Washington Fields Park Complex Phase 1. That is yet, we don't know where that is. That's that was just the set aside for that. It was anticipated, if you remember the discussion, you probably remember there was some discussion about ball fields and, you know, anticipating some growth in the cemetery area. And so then you can see the other things that are at least included in that. And many of these, again, are, so the Boilers Park is being completed now. The Hellhole Park was just recently completed. The Mill Creek Trailhead is well underway, at least in concept. The Shooting Star Park is done, and there's impact fee credits there, which makes it part of that as well. And I realize if I scroll, my lines stay fixed, so I'd have to erase them here, but you can see that.
Any additional questions on that particular item, gentlemen? Councilman Ivey, you still have a question? You want to move on, Roger?
Yeah, so let me just to wrap that up, and I want to make sure that the council's okay with the fact that, again, you'll have the capital budget as part of the overall budget, but we open the budgets all the time. So, I mean, if we get some details on the pump park, and the pump park is the direction we want to go, we would anticipate we would open that up as part of a general opening of the budget. We would more particularly identify that, and that can be that Washington Fields Phase 1 portion. So if we wanted to. So this is what we kind of brought forward from years past. So it's kind of just a long novel is what it is. But don't feel that if you have any questions or concerns down the road that either things can't be removed, things can't be adjusted, or things can't be added. It's not, it's a budget that's like any of our other budgets. It's only subject to your opening and the process by which we do that. So I think, Mayor, unless there's other questions on that, and again, please get with us if you have any particular questions, and the department heads will know precisely what those are.
Thank you. Any additional items? Should we move forward? Any additional items to move forward on, Roger?
No, I don't think so. We'll just kind of prepare that as, keep that as is, and just have that as part of the tentative budget as it moves forward. And I'll talk about the process from the tentative budget on as we get near the end here, so everybody understands what all that means, or is reminded, because most of you have gone through it, how that process works from that point on. The next question, of course, I would ask is just to answer any, and I really, I hope some of you didn't even take the opportunity to watch the little budget video. I rewatched it and bored myself to tears. And some of you already understand the budget process really well. My main intention of that was to just talk about how fund accounting is how it works and why you see what you see with these different silos. And this had to pertain more with the operational budgets and how they work. I did want to share this document that I know I've shared with you before, but this was requested, and this was a great request too, by the way. And that is, I know we've talked a lot about sales tax and other things, but oh, let me see if I can come down a little bit. But this gives you a really good idea of what our current budget and what our proposed budget for next year is changing. Of the categories that we substantially changed, what was a $21 million budget in the current budget and would have been forecasted to go up is now a $14 million budget with almost a 30% decrease in those line items. And again, what you're going to see with the line items we did not put in there, those were the ones, what we did not put in there is where we consciously didn't go in and say, well, this is going to have an impact because of COVID. All of it will be impacted, but we're not necessarily seeing the direct impacts here. And again, most of the operational stuff is fairly flat. But I wanted to show that to you to just show, because we've talked about sales tax, we've talked about road tax, we've talked about building permits, we've talked about impact fees, but you had never seen them all on one page as to what the changes are we're proposing for this year. We hope we're wrong. We hope that 30% is much less than that. Brian and I were talking today, and we decided today that I suppose if you're budget people, it's either the worst year to deal with this or the best year, because the fact of the matter is you guys' guesses are as good as ours at the moment. And we also know that we get a chance to relook at this budget over and over and over again throughout the upcoming year as we get more data and more input to know where we're off, where we're on, where we need to make adjustments. We've done our best to be very conservative in our recommendations. We may not be conservative enough. We may find that out. We may be overly conservative, but the great part is this is going to be a budget that's going to be continually worked on throughout the year. So either you love that as a budget officer because we don't want you to be stressed that you're set in stone. On the other hand, we may hate that as budget officers because we like to be much more precise than the world is granting us right now. So, but I guess the next question I would have is just operational budgets, not so much probably the revenue as questions you might have on the, and again,
could I jump in on that last page before we move on?
The last, yes.
I've got Councilman Staley, then Coates, and then Ivy, manager, that have questions.
Yeah, manager, this is actually very helpful. I appreciate you summarizing this. It seems like over the last month or so, have you dialed this in or refined this even more? It seems like, and maybe my memory's off, but it seems like we had some initial estimates, but it looks like you've dialed in even more to what the decrease in revenue may be. Can you just speak to that a little bit and how you made these assumptions? I realize that this budget will be a work in process, but can you speak a little bit to how you made these revenue adjustments and assumptions?
So, in the best way possible. So as it dealt with taxes, we tried to find out what the best data we were getting from the state. And Councilman Ivy knows this. We've been getting some information from the University of Utah's Business Research Center. They're not giving even precise information because they don't know either. We've talked to the State Tax Commission. We're, of course, pretty active in all of our state associations. And really, nobody really knows. The problem we also have is we have no indicators. We have no real-time data right now because, as I mentioned to you the other day, all the revenue is lagging in the state by 2 months. So we've been 6 weeks into the COVID shutdown, and we will be another at least 2 weeks, but probably more, about 6 more weeks before we're going to start to get true numbers. And that would be just numbers at the front end of the COVID time to see what that even did. And so from a municipality, we don't even have good data right now to pull from. So we tried to be overly conservative on the taxes. We looked at what the state was kind of considering on their fuel tax, and that's what funds are. That's what funds, at least in part, are Class C. And then there's a sales tax highway, and of course we adjusted that kind of somewhat accordingly a little bit. Again, you got to remember the sales tax is based upon a population base, so we kind of gain there, but we lose on the local option of the 1%. We redid our building permits. Our building permits are what we call a driver. And what we do is we go back to our departments who deal with permits and we say, what is your best guesstimate on potential changes in our original estimate of permits? And then once we get a permit number, a permit count, we can then go in and just extrapolate at that point by timesing it by the average building permit fee.
Are we still at 410 or did that number adjust?
We're still at 410, I believe, is what our original one is. And we're hoping actually if we can bounce back that that's going to be a little over conservative. And then the same thing on the impact fees. We just take the count times the impact fee. And we have to do it both north and south of the river since we don't have power south of the river. So there's been some drilling down, but only to become more precise, Councilman. But again, the methodology we used has basically stayed the same, which is not a methodology we will absolutely fall on our sword.
Thank you, Manager.
So Roger, my question has to do with, it's probably a fairly simple question, is these just say impact fee revenue? I mean, aren't these specific for each impact fee?
Yeah, they are, and we're sorry. So those 41, 42, 43, 51, 52, 53, 57 numbers at the front, those tell us which funds they're associated with. I can give you that real quick. I'll just have to pull it out of the book here. So I know I've got Brian here, but I can probably do it just as quick. So
and really my question is when I looked at the percentage change, they're consistent. I mean, we're basing it on how many building permits we have, and it surprises me that the percentage has changed so much between each impact fee.
Well, again, because they're different dollar values too. So you take the count, you're going to times it by the dollar, and you're going to have different percentages based on dollar.
So that percentage is based on dollar.
Yes, it's based upon dollars, not on count. The count's going to stay consistent, but the dollar, the impact fee themselves vary. And so that's why you have difference of percentages because of what current budgets and future budgets are. So that to say that they would all be the same percentage would not be the correct way to look at that.
Yeah, I don't know if you can update this and just send out a new one with what those are.
Do you want me to just
I can tell you really quick if you want. 41 is streets, 42 is public safety, 43 is leisure services, 44 is not on there, 45 is not on there, 51 is water, 52 is sewer, 53 is power, and 57 is storm drain.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Ivy?
Yes, thank you. And Roger, I did watch your budget video. I enjoyed it. I got popcorn and wanting to know that anything that I can do to learn about the municipal budget, I'm all about that. So I appreciate having that video. But my question or my comment maybe is more for those citizens that may be listening at home that have heard different rumors and comments from Washington, D.C. and from the Capitol. And that is how the CARES Act is going to trickle down to the municipalities. And right now, it's very difficult for us as a city to anticipate any of those funds into what we're budgeting for right now. And so again, our city manager referred to the fact that we can reopen budget as maybe if we do get those funds and as they come in, and we can adjust this back. But having a conservative approach right now is the prudent thing to do. And I appreciate the numbers. Thank you.
Anybody else? Did we get Councilman Clough and Councilman Ward on?
I can't speak for Councilman Clough, but I'm on there.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you. All right,
So
any,
Mayor-
any additional questions on this part? All right,
So I'll just move,
Well-
toward I'll just move toward the operational budget just to see if there's any questions. Again, what we ask our department heads to do, and you probably saw that in the assumption letter that we send out every year, and we do the same thing every year, is we ask them to maintain levels of service. So whatever they're providing, we know we've got a growing population, so we know that level of service has to at least be, is elastic in some ways, but what we ask them to do is maintain current levels of service. If they choose to expand the level of service, they need to get back with us and say, well, here's where we'd like to enhance or expand our level of service in areas that we weren't there before. I'm not aware of any request that we had for expanded levels of service. So in that case, we always ask them, we ask you to maintain levels of service for our population, and then put your budget together, your operational budget, based upon what you need to maintain that levels of service. Now, we know that some costs go up, some they've reduced. You can see some travel and that sort of stuff all got reduced and some of those type of things. And so they usually have done a really good job of saying, this is just what it needs from us to kind of just be able to maintain the levels of service. But this would be your opportunity, I think, if there's something that jumped right out at you, that we could maybe have the department heads weighed in if you had any of that. I tried to tell you, you can get really swallowed up in this easy, but we're sure happy to answer any of the questions you might have.
Councilman Coates?
Yes, city manager. I kind of took your advice there and looked at the stuff that jumped out at me. A couple of the things that jumped at me was under the capital project, leisure services. There is a contributions and transfers. There was like in the current budget, there's a negative, it's page 31.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I'll jump down.
There's a negative 948,000 and negative 798 in the current budget. And then the proposed budget, it's like 894,000 and $1 million. So just, I'm sure it's transferring or something, but those numbers jumped out at me.
Yeah, so I'm going to find it here because I think I know the answer, but I'm going to look real quick. I got to find it before I feel good about answering this. Okay, so the transfer, it's this section here, Councilman. I should circle.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, we have to pay debt out of a separate fund. It's a debt service fund. So that's one of those silos. So we have to take the funds that come into the one fund and transfer them over to the debt payment fund. So this is that debt payments that you see. This is the transfer to MBA's, the Municipal Building Authority. Those are our parks that we built. Those were funded under a municipal building authority. And so that's what that transfer is to service that debt. So it goes transferred to the MBA fund.
And that's why it's in the negative?
That's why it would, well, yes, that's why it would be a transfer out.
Okay.
Okay, then the 64,676 is a transfer to debt service fund 36. And Brian can maybe weigh in on that particular one. He knows those codes exactly, or Barry. These are both going to debt service funds. MBA is its own debt service fund, and this debt service fund 36. What particularly is the debt service 36, Brian or Barry, do you know?
So I'm talking the one on the north. I'm not talking that one.
I would just guess, I think we have a couple payments for the community center and for Sullivan Park. I believe it's close to $1 million. So that would make sense. So probably principal and interest, I would say, on those two. I'm not sure. Brian would have to answer that, but I think that's what it would be, isn't it, Roger? Those payments.
We still have, and I know you may be asked, Barry, do we still have an obligation on your Telegraph Street? I think we do, don't we?
That I'm not sure, but I know we do on Sullivan Park and on the community center.
I'm just wondering.
But how come it's a negative this year or this current budget and a positive next year? Like, why wouldn't it be a negative every year?
Are you talking these columns here, current budget?
I'm talking the current budget. So if you scroll up to page 31, the 798,044. And then there's a positive $1 million. And I'm just curious why it's not consistent. If it's a negative in the current budget, because we're paying those funds, why is it a positive in the following year?
Okay, so this negative is money coming in from prior year fund balances. So this
Okay.
798 is a combination of these above it, okay? So the 948, and don't get too confused with the negatives and the positives here, but we're bringing in use of prior fund balance for projects that are going to happen sometime, somewhere down here.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so that's what that one is. That's a prior fund. And so what that's done is when you add up these, really these negative, well, these are positives. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. Yeah, so that was put into a fund balance the previous year. It's being brought in this year. I think I've got that right. Is that right, Brian?
So in the, yeah, if it's a negative, my guess, yeah, one's going to be where it's fund balance, it's increasing. The other one's going to be we use fund balance, and the other one's where we did not use fund balance. We added it to the fund balance. And Fund 36 is debt service.
We'd have to look exactly what that debt service is. I think you've still got an obligation on your Telegraph Street. We're trying to finish off, but we'll check on that 36 and get back with you, Councilman, on that one. But that is a debt service fund. So it looks like this last year, again, we had a transfer out probably of 948 in impact fee balance, and then this year we're bringing that back in at 894. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
It does.
Councilman Staley.
Oh, could I have a couple more.
Oh, sorry,
real quick.
sorry.
So that was the one I caught. And then the other one was, sorry, I'm jumping around on you, page 19. It's
Okay.
the Washington City Foundation.
Yeah, let me get
And
there.
it looked like it was consistent for the past 2 years of 7,000 to 10,000. And then we're suggesting nothing this year. Is that, we're just not putting any money toward that this year?
Well, we don't put money toward it. So what it does, and I'll check on that because we probably ought to have something in there. See if I can. So where this money comes from is last year it came from donations at the Covington home. It came from prior year stuff, it looks like, but we should have something in this budget. Again, it's just an estimate because we don't know what kind of contributions will come in. And so we're going to take a look at that and probably set something in that budget, Councilman. Thank you.
Okay. And then my last question that I have is the very page 51. It's the fund balance. It just shows nothing. Is that pretty typical, or is it just not filled in yet?
No, we have to be, I got to go there, but I'm going to tell you, we have to be balanced. So let's go there first.
Nope, up, go up to 51, right there.
Okay, so this is Fund 99. I don't think we have anything in Fund 99. I think that's not a.
Okay.
Okay.
It's
so what
nothing then.
So this is the piece that I was talking about. So that's 62 million, and that's 66 million. What we'll do is that has to be kind of balanced out. Now you'll see that they don't necessarily here, but we have to make sure. Well, sorry, that's not correct. Sorry. This is the total budget. This is all the enterprise funds and everything. The general fund has to be balanced. So this is just the total revenue of all the city. This is the total expense of all the city. But again, this is a budget. So fund balance oftentimes is there as an expenditure that was collected in a prior year. But But we know that we're going to at least run into some negative fund balance this year based upon the funding, but we'll double check that to make sure that numbers, but that's of everything. So that doesn't have to be balanced, just the general fund does.
Those are the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Staley.
Hey, first of all, I just really appreciated the questions that Councilman Coates asked, and I thought the answers were spot on. Before I ask a few questions, Manager, would you continue talking? We're looking at this proposed budget for, we'll call it the fiscal year 2021. We're anticipating revenue from all sources to all funds, 62 million, approximately 62 million, I'm rounding. And expenses at 66,600,000 and change. When you say that we're drawing from fund balance, are you talking about just the general fund balance that we maintain, or are you talking about fund balance in the proprietary funds as well that have been saved up for these projects?
Both, and I got to be careful that I don't mislead you because they use two different terms. So fund balance is a governmental fund term. So the fund balance we would use in the general fund. That general fund is the one that has to be balanced. And if it's not balanced, it always has to be balanced, but you may use yes. Enterprise funds can always run a positive or a negative, but again, budgets are snapshots, only 12 months. So
correct.
We would call those reserves. So I just don't want to confuse you.
Okay, so in this particular case, is the difference fund balance or reserves?
It'll be a combination of every fund.
Okay, so we'd have to just drill down to find out what we would pull from fund balance and what comes from proprietary funds in reserves.
Yeah, and you're only looking at the last page. So all that is explained as you move up. So as you go into each one of them, you'll see that they'll all have, oh, let's don't go to irrigation. That's always not.
You know what might be easy is just to look at the general fund. And I think I can see that general fund revenue, and I'm just going to go approximate, is 20,600,000 and change in revenue and just over 21 million in expense. So it looks like there's an approximate 400,000-ish that we would pull from fund balance.
Yes, that's correct.
Budget, and the rest would be reserves from the enterprise funds. Does that sound right?
That is correct. So again, this total here, this one here is going into that total, but so is all of the reserve, or not reserve funds, the carryover funds for capital projects.
Yeah.
From previous
Makes
years.
that makes sense.
And again, the problem is you got to look at kind of a balance sheet to say, well, what's our true picture? These budgets are not balance sheets. You get balance sheets and those come in your audits, but budgets are just 12 months. Thank you.
Hey, great answer. I want to stay on the general fund for just a minute at a real high level. I don't want to do a deep dive. And then I just have a few other just kind of brief questions, if you don't mind. Just general fund expenses. It looks like revenue is going to be down approximately 1.5 million year over year to the general fund. And I'm just noticing personnel expense. It looks like it's going to be up just over 600,000. Could you speak to that? Is that just benefits, or are you contemplating new hires in this?
So this one has no new hires. Again, I mentioned to you this particular budget has no new hires because we're waiting to hear your direction. Okay.
What's the difference then? Why the 600,000 increase year over year?
I would have to look at, I'd have to pull that up and take a look at it.
That's okay. I don't want to put you on the spot today, but that would be great to just kind of have a better understanding there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing also in general fund. Go ahead.
Real quick, can I just, before we leave that too? So I want to, again, also indicate that this budget, again, doesn't include either new hires or any pay adjustments. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it's likely benefit cost and other things, but you'll get back to.
But the benefit costs were only an overall increase of 150. So we'll have to calculate that up and get back with you on that.
Okay, great. Then the other question I have is, it appears that like material and supplies is going up almost 100,000. maybe that would be something to look at. And in fairness, I'm looking at a budget summary rather than the budget worksheet. I wanted to stay a little bit higher level. So I'm just looking at a budget summary for Fund 10.
Is that the one I sent you, the other one?
Yes, I had reached, and
Okay.
thank you for sending that. Let me just get these other two so you can make a note. So I'm just looking at the difference year over year for personnel, understanding that that doesn't include pay increases or new hires. Materials and supplies, it looks like year over year is about 100,000 more. I'm looking at about 100,000 a year over year increase in services. And those are the three I have questions on. And then my other question is, what debt service do we have out of the general fund? I know we're paying, you know, roughly a couple 100,000 a year out of that. I'm just wondering what we're paying debt on out of the general fund specifically.
I'll pull that, but I'm going to pull it from the audit. So if you'll give me a minute.
And while you're looking at that, obviously, anytime there's ways to be efficient or to you know, do more or do the same with less, certainly from my position, I would appreciate that in any expenses that can be looked at. And I know you do, and each department does that, but just to keep that top of mind and being efficient.
Yeah, I'll look that other one up. I got to look in the audit for your question on the debt. We have actually very little debt in the city for the most part, but I'll look that up particularly here in a minute.
That
Yeah,
would be
so-
great. And then the other question I would have, and this is the last I have for right now, is just any debt servicing through the municipal building authority, what we're paying on, and just some general input on what those are. And I know we're in a very good financial position, but I just want to be aware of what we owe and who we owe and what the terms are.
Yeah, so the municipal building authority includes the community center.
Okay.
It includes the Sullivan Park.
Yes.
It includes the police station. I believe
Yes.
that's it on the MBA.
Great. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
And one thing, we'll look at these. I listed these fund totals. I'd mentioned before that one of the challenges that we have, and again, we asked the department heads to maintain level of service. Last year, of course, we added about 1,800 residents. And so we will look at these individually, these particular sections, but in some cases, I think that what they've tried to do is just say, we need so much, a little additional more even to serve the existing citizens. That's what we've asked them to do, I should say.
Thank you, Manager. Any additional questions on that part? Councilman Ivey.
Yes. City Manager, as I look at the proposed budget for 2021, the expenses are 66 million. The revenue is 62 million now. I know that is due in large part to the capital outlay. Could you just talk to that for just a minute and discuss, because to someone that doesn't understand the whole process, it may look suspect when you have expenses that are greater than your revenue in those columns.
Well, again, we kind of were referring to that just a minute ago. So the general fund will, based upon the revenue, so let's talk about each fund individual. So the general fund, of course, we have a requirement to balance. We have to balance that whether if we have a surplus, it has to go to fund balance, which again, we have a cap on that. If we have a deficit, it has to come from fund balance. We have completely maxed out our fund balance as a city. That's a good thing. What I mean by that is we have the most amount of money we could have in a rainy day fund right now under state statute. That's 25% of our revenues. And so we do anticipate with lower revenues this year that some funding would possibly come out based upon council's decisions, would have to come out of fund balance to balance the general fund. But that's what fund balances are for. They're to keep kind of things moving, to keep some levelization. to services, especially since our services are much more driven by people than they are necessarily revenue. Revenue is the constrainer, but people are what drives the work that we do. And so fund balance is there to kind of shave off the valley and also maybe take some of the peak to shave off the valley. So general fund will be balanced one way or another based upon the decisions, all our decisions of whether we kind of balance with existing revenues, take some from fund balance, whatever. What happens though is again, we have enterprise funds. These are business type funds for the public that basically have to function like businesses. So water, power, sewer, those types of funds are business funds. And they're allowed to accrue a lot of money over the years, and they anticipate that they will, not to just sit on it, that we have to earmark every dollar that is put into our rates. But that money can be earmarked for projects that may need to be paid for 5 years down the road, or to even begin to pay the debt service on a project if it's needed sooner. And so that money's sitting over here outside of the budget lines, outside of the budget borders. And so when the time comes that we expand, oftentimes that money then is used from previous years, and it's there. It's not a negative. It's just because budgets look at a 12-month period. And this was funds that are available outside the 12-month period. Sometimes it'll look like a deficit when in fact we're using fund balance or reserves. I got to keep not getting those confused between the two types of funds. That may have been just as clear as mud, but that's kind of the best way I can explain it a little bit, Councilman.
Well, I appreciate that. I just know that sometimes our citizens will look at those bottom lines and just have concern because an expense is greater than the revenue, but understanding that there's a matrix to it and that it all makes sense and that we actually have money to pay our bills is important for our citizens to know. So thank you.
So to that point, there's never been Washington City for the whole time I've been here, and I'm easy to say this prior to my time, is that we have never spent revenues that we didn't have. Now, that doesn't mean that we haven't debt service thing. And I've said this before, the debt service is a tool of equity than it is because you don't have the money, because you're building something that's going to serve the next population for the next 15 years. And sometimes you create debt so that it's got an equity component to it. So people coming 10 years from now, so the people sitting here today don't have to pay everything. It is going to benefit people who come in 10 years. So debt in government is almost more of a tool of equity than it is anything else. So we do have minimal debt, but we do have some debt. But the fact of the matter is I'm very comfortable in saying Washington City has never spent money that they haven't had. As a matter of fact, we've stockpiled as much money as we possibly can under rainy day funds. We've had the money when we've needed it, not for everything. We're not completely got a golden, silver spoon in our mouth, but for the projects we've needed, we've had money for it, or we've had to put them off until we do have money. That's kind of a pay-as-you-go approach. And so very appreciative. We've had very conservative councils. I think our philosophy as budget officers are very conservative. And might I add also, Washington City has been very benefited with growth too. And that's been a big part of our good health right now. So we hope that continues.
Thank you. Any additional questions on those items moving forward?
So Mayor, at this point, what I'd like to do is turn it back to the council. I know the council had some continued discussion, I think, amongst themselves. And again, we're just looking at direction at this point from the council as it relates to personnel, because what we would like to do is get back with you, of course, on these questions, find out if there's concerns you have beyond that, get some general direction from the council on what they'd like to see with personnel so that we can plug those back into the puzzle and create a tentative budget. Now, before we go into that, let me explain how the process goes from there. Because again, you don't set the tentative budget and you're stuck. That's not how it works. So the tentative budget will have to be adopted, it has to be adopted statutorily by the city council on their first meeting in May, which for us is May 13th. And basically all that says is we as a council have accepted basically management's budget. And again, it's management and council working together. It's budget. And now we're going to put it out to the public and let the public have time to look at it. And then we'll have a public hearing, which we'll schedule either the latter part of May or the 1st of June, depending on schedules, and we'll get back with you on that. The public can then come in, comment. Council can take that input. Council can say, well, we want to tweak, so they can tweak then. They don't have to get input and still tweak. And then they'll prepare a final budget to be adopted before the end of June, which then will be submitted to the state treasurer's office and state offices up there by basically July 1st, because we start a new fiscal year July 1st. And then again, as we've already mentioned, we will anticipate probably more than normal budget openings this upcoming year. So we get a chance to do this as many times as you enjoy doing it. And as we have continued data that comes in. So what we would like to be prepared to do is give to you, based upon your general direction, a tentative budget that you could feel okay about. Generally speaking, we may recognize that there won't be 5 budgets, but generally speaking, how you would like us to go. And so I'm going to turn this back to the council to discuss personnel issues.
Councilman Ivey?
Yes, thank you. In regards to new hires, I know it's been recommended by staff that there's no new hires till January, but I would just like to put it out there that there is certain areas that of the new hires that are a little more sensitive than others in regards to public safety and things like that. If there is a need, I would certainly recommend and encourage those concerns to be brought forward, not knowing exactly what the future holds for what the city might get from federal funds. I know that we need to be reserved in that now, but just moving forward, I would be open to considering hires before January if the situation presented itself.
Thank you. Councilman Coates?
So, Councilman Ivy, I do appreciate that. Going over this list, I don't know if I don't mind waiting till January. I look at the different departments, and I kind of have a question here for Roger based on, you've got your general fund and your enterprise fund. The enterprise fund can handle hires now versus the general fund, correct? Because they're all, the revenue's set. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the only thing we would, and I want to be fair to the enterprise funds too. Yes, the enterprise funds are a little bit more self-sustaining for us because they're not tax-based. I will tell you that one area that we want watching very carefully is utility collections. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to give you this number. So we typically will have approximately, when I say this number, it doesn't mean that we're not collecting. It means that this is the number of accounts we typically have a challenge with each month of collecting. So a typical month for us would be about 100 utility accounts that maybe go into arrears. Okay, it's probably not bad for a city. In the month of April, we had 800. And it's all related to, of course, many people being out of employment. So the only thing I'm watching, or we're watching carefully, that will have an impact on our utility, our enterprise accounts, is possibly if we take a hit on utility collections, because that goes to their bottom line. But otherwise, you're correct.
So Roger, just to follow up on that, so currently right now, are we on a non-shut off, and are we going to switch that soon?
So this is interesting. We can actually, yeah, we're actually going to have a meeting on that tomorrow because, and I'm going to make you aware of this. So there is a bill being floated in Congress right now, and it's largely from the minority party that is that wants to put into place a non-disconnect option for local governments. And basically, that's a real concern to us. I don't know if it'll pass. Right now, it's a crazy time, and people are passing a lot of things that at the end of the day, I'm not sure how we're paying for. But one of the things that at some point, yes, we need to start collecting. The question is, how do we give some compassion to those who need it and keep responsible those who need it? And so we had not anticipated doing a disconnect this month. At some point, we also realized that some holes may get dug so deep that people won't get out. Now, again, the CARES Act might be able to provide some offset. We're not sure on that yet. We certainly are not supportive of that particular piece of legislation being floated around in Washington, I can tell you that. Especially where it strips local government authority and kind of says, you know, fend for yourself on how you might be able to take care of that down the road. But it hasn't passed yet. But yes, at some point, Councilman, we've got to kind of figure this out. What we really want for those citizens who might be joining us tonight is if in fact you find yourself in a challenge, and we understand that, if you would at least give us a call so that we could work with you and make sure that we all kind of are on the same page. We've offered that in times past. Some have taken advantage of it. For those we appreciate. Others have not, so we don't kind of know where they're at. But we want to be able to be workable, but yet not dig ourselves into a hole. But that's the only thing that we've run into that will be my big concern on the enterprise funds.
Okay, well, thank you. Just so the council knows kind of where I'm running from is, or not running from, sorry, looking at is there a happy median between this? This is all the department heads, they all have a need, but where can we meet in the middle and move forward is kind of what I'm looking at. And some of those are like public safety and fire, if we need those now, because we've increased so many more residents now. And same thing with the parks and the streets, but maybe we request, if they're requesting 2, we give them 1 or vice versa. That's kind of where I'm landing, but I'm also open to wait till January and kind of feel how these next couple months land. But that's kind of where I'm landing, is kind of meet in the middle for if there's an immediate need that needs to be right now.
Thank you.
That's-
Councilman Staley.
So thank you, Mayor. I have my hand up, but if anybody wants to speak to what Councilman Coates just said, I would be happy to hear. I don't have anything particular to say on that, but so I can wait for my comment. It's a little bit of a specific hire.
Doesn't look like it. Councilman, go ahead.
Okay. The last meeting we had in regards to the budget, we talked about a utility clerk, and I had brought that question up. I wondered if Carrie Wheelwright could speak as to whether or not this utility clerk is an additional full-time or a full-timer replacing 2 part-timers.
What we're requesting for the utility office is 1 full-time person to replace 2 part-time people. So it's basically a wash as far as the wages go. We're giving up 50 hours worth of part-time for a 40-hour work week for a full-time person. The only additional cost you would have would be the benefits that would be on top of that.
Carrie, can you speak to what obviously from a financial standpoint, it's about a push. Can you speak to why it makes sense to do that now and what that would do for a very busy utility office?
Well, it gives us more consistency in here as far as the clerks that we have up front, because when we have people come in and ask questions, they're getting the same people each time they talk. And we found that in hiring full-time people that we are getting better applicants that are coming in as far as the number of applicants and as far as the qualified applicants. We see so much turnover because the part-time clerks, many of them apply thinking that it may turn into a full-time, and it does not, so they end up leaving us to go to a full-time job somewhere else because they're seeking out full-time work plus something with a benefits package to it.
Thank you. I think we all understand now that that would definitely benefit your department, but it's almost a revenue neutral change. I just wanted to make sure I understood that correctly as we consider the budget. Thank you.
That is correct.
Thank you.
So
Councilman Ivey?
on that, may I just jump in real quick on Councilman Staley's question? Are we replacing, like, did we lose someone that we're just, now we're going to hire a full-time, or are we taking one of our part-timers and promoting them? I'm just wondering if we're losing someone by doing this, or if we already lost them.
Well, we have not lost them yet. We have 2 part-timers right now. And I anticipate that if the full-time position opens up, that each of those 2 will probably apply for the position. But we will open the position up to see what we get as far as talent out in the workforce. So we will eliminate those 2 part-time positions, and the full-time position will take over the hours of those 2 part-time positions.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Staley, got a question?
No, I just didn't lower my hand. You'd think after 3 or 4 Zoom meetings, I would get it, Mayor.
You're okay. Okay, any additional questions on that item, on that topic? Good questions, good questions. All right. Moving forward,
Well, what I'd like, Mayor, is that summed up.
okay,
Where the council would maybe feel comfortable would be great if they're ready for that. If they're not, fine, we can keep talking about it. But I'm not sure that I necessarily felt strongly where I should fall on this thing.
Councilman Ivy?
Yes, where I'm at is somewhere kind of in the middle, like Councilman Coates said. I think that we need to be prudent, but we also realize that we're a growing city and we have needs and concerns. It's really hard to identify the absolute priority because we understand that these wouldn't have been requested if they weren't needed direly. But for me personally, if you consider that there's like 11 people that have been, maybe 14 people that have been requested. If we could again meet somewhere in the middle of that, assessing who should be hired now and maybe who later. But for me personally, I'm good with some hires before the end of the year. I think that we still need to keep moving forward and servicing our citizens. We only do that by having proper employees in place that can do that. I think that we will be, in the end, I think that we'll be able to pay for them in a very responsible way. And so for me personally, I wouldn't mind moving forward with some hires now, maybe scrutinizing or really drilling down on those that are needed now and hiring those. But that's more specifically where I'm at.
Councilman Coates?
So I think I would go back to Roger and say, can you take a stab at reducing the amount and get your absolute need at this time for these areas, and everyone not get what they want, but we get progress forward is kind of my recommendation.
So we can give that a shot. So let me tell you, and you know this all, I think, for the most part. This is a pretty good group of department heads. One of the things that I've always appreciated with these department heads is that they've always looked at the city as a whole and said, this is where we think it's important and we're willing to step back if somebody else needs to step forward right now. And I've appreciated that from them. You are all correct. Every position that was requested of us is a needed position. We know that. But I'm happy to, again, gather around the campfire with them and to say, help me, based upon what you've heard from the council members, help me set some priorities here, and then we can surely send that back and then leave it to your discretion. And we could do that all over the course of the next week so that we can then get your input on that and then be prepared to put something in the tentative budget for you.
And I appreciate that, Roger. I think that'll help immensely. And, you know, I know we might be shortfall on, I'm more optimistic, I think, on this tax revenue for paying utility bills. I don't know how many people took advantage or how many people don't. I don't know what the unemployment rate is in Washington City right offhand, but I'm optimistic that maybe it's just a 1 month thing and they can get back on track. And so I kind of look at the enterprise funds that it's self-sustainable on those hires as well. Now, they might not be the most important, But I just look at that and I'm more optimistic. And I don't know if we'll know in the next 2 weeks if it's a trend that we're continuing with. Is that some data that we can have?
I don't know. Well, yeah, I think every day that goes by helps us with data, but I'll tell you, I think it is a fair assessment that all of you have made. The enterprise funds are much more stable. That is fair. And I'm just always a cautious person and always look behind every door when it comes to the budgets. And so I mentioned the utility payments is just one concerning area. But short of that, I agree with all of you. The enterprise funds are much more stable than the general fund is. The general fund is stable too, but that's a little bit more of a wild card right now. But good statement. I agree with that.
But that would help me a lot. And so I appreciate you taking another stab at looking at this. And because I do feel that we are behind with staff with the current growth we've had in the past 2 to 3 years. And I'd like to give everyone what they need, but I don't think we can at this time. So, all right, that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councilman Staley?
One place that we might start is I brought up on the general fund, just materials and supplies and services. Both of those seem to have gone up about 100,000. If manager, you could query into that might and see why those both have increased by that. That would possibly free up a couple 100,000.
Yeah.
And when we first started, oh, go ahead. I'm not asking you to do that now unless you have something to add.
No, I just wanted to say a couple things while you're on that. We probably won't be able to pull that much out of it, I wouldn't think. We'll ask them to sharpen their pencil on that, but we probably won't be able to pull out that. But also do recognize that you are not also seeing operational expenses associated with new hires. So for instance, policemen, that will come at an increased operational cost because we have to put them in cars, we have to equip them, firemen the same way. All of them will have some level, but usually you're, so I wanted to point that out. Go ahead, Councilman.
Great. Thank you, Manager. You know, when we started this discussion, when this new environment of COVID was just unrolling and we started the budget conversations, I brought up concerns with new hires until we had, you know, firmer numbers, till we saw how this would affect the economy. I'm still probably a little cautious in that I tend to lean more to letting some real numbers shake out before committing to budgeted expenses and new hires. You know, I've brought up a few different areas where there are some needs. Obviously, police is a very high priority as well. So as you look at this, it's hard for us as a council to go in and pick winners and losers. And when we try to discuss needs from different vantage points, sometimes that can be misconstrued. Other than, I think, that full-time utility position, which is about a revenue neutral, I think I'm personally more comfortable to see where actual numbers come in and look at a budget opening for hires. And again, as my fellow council members have said, we would lean very heavily on staff. I mean, the last meeting, we read through the justifications that came back after the first meeting, and we tried to make sense of some of those. But in fairness, they all have very high priority needs, and they're not asking for things that are unreasonable. It's just that the way I run my own budget, I just typically am very cautious with the revenue before I commit to expenses. So I would prefer to see actual numbers come in before we commit to new hires, unless there's something that just, you know, can't possibly be taken care of without. I know that doesn't put you in an easy position, but just do your best, manager, and we're going to do our best, and we're going to try to work with you on a good budget for the city. Okay, we want to support you. We want to support each department. We want to support each employee. We're just trying to do our best as you are as well.
Yeah, and I think this dialogue has really been good for us as well, and including for the department heads to be here as well. And I think we can take the input. I would Mayor, if Councilman Ward would like to give some thoughts as well. But I think this has been good input for us. I think we can, again, put something back together that we could give to all of you that you could say, yeah, I think we could work with that, and that would work. Again, we can hit the reset button lots of times on this issue, so we're okay. But Mayor, if Councilman Ward has some thoughts that would be as well, or Councilman Clough if he's on.
I don't think Clough is on. Anything, Councilman Ward?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Mayor, we can work with that. Let me jump back and answer a question that Councilman Staley, and I'm just going from the audit just on debt a little bit. And maybe this will answer your question, and if not, we can always dive into it a little bit more. But I'm just going to run through some numbers so you just have some idea. And one of the great, and this is also located on our website, and I even encourage the public. This is our audit, 2019 audit, and it's really not a bad read. And now,
Compared to what?
compared to the state stat. Yes, but so Washington's, here's our debt outlay right now. So we have $6.1 million in debt for the Coral Canyon Special Service District. Although that is considered a governmental activity, it is it's a firewall. So no citizen is responsible for that debt with the exception of those who live within the Special Service District. That actually will be defeased in 2026. So we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel on that whole bond. We then, continuing under the governmental bonds. So these are ones that are related primarily to the NBA. We have 4.2 million, 1.4, and 3.2. The 4.2 is the community center. I'm just remembering what these are if I can. The 4.2, I believe, is the community center. The 1.4, I have to look to see what that one is. The 3.2, I believe, is the police station. Yeah, I'll come back on the 1.4.
Is the 1.4 Sullivan Park?
Yeah, I thought it was more than that, but it could be. So it might be that, because I know the Sullivan Park.
We didn't pay for the land, so it's quite possible.
Yeah, and we paid for the Sullivan Park in a lot in impact fees. So it probably is that, because I do know that the Sullivan Park took a piece of the MBA. So it's got to be that. We have the sales tax revenue bond of 1.3. That was I think is that remaining, Mike, on the, that isn't Washington Parkway, is it? Still anything remaining on Washington Parkway? That was a sales tax revenue bond.
I believe it is.
What's that?
I believe it is Washington Park.
It's Washington Parkway. Then the excise tax road fund, that was Telegraph, and there's only 244,000 left of that. And that's all the governmental activities. Okay, then of the business type activities, we have a water revenue refunding bond of 400,000. We have a water revenue refunding bond of 7.9 million. And we have an electrical revenue bond of 5.5 million, and I'm rounding these, by the way. And then we have just some small lease components to that. The overall total of long-term liability for Washington City is 39 million. If you look at, we have a total budget overall of 60 million. You can see that that we're in pretty good shape from a debt standpoint, and particularly from a general governmental debt. We've never issued a general obligation bond. Now, Coral Canyon is a special service district bond, so there's some similarities, but again, it's firewalled, and Washington's never had to issue a general obligation bond, which is, I think, positive. We don't have a credit rating because of it, but on general obligation, but it's positive, I think, because that always hits the back end of the taxpayer all the time. So debt-wise, we've been very, very prudent in the debt as well. I hope that helped a little bit, Councilman.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
So Mayor, I'm done with what I need, and then we can start to, again, put this puzzle, the few pieces of the puzzle in. We'll get it out to the council within the next couple of days, let them to begin to review it. get feedback back to us, and then we can decide, you know, what we need before a tentative budget then gets presented. And you can decide, Mayor, if it's going to require another meeting. We would have an opportunity for one more. If not, then and maybe we don't make that decision yet. Maybe you see what we kind of come up with on a tentative side of things.
Thank you. Councilman Staley?
Manager, as we near the end of this fiscal year, we've had some fund balance there, but we've entered a new economic environment. Would you mind just keeping us posted on what the projections are going to be of where that fund balance might be by year end, and when we might need to take council action so that we can, you know, we can use our best judgment in if and where that money is allocated?
Yeah, and I appreciate everybody's patience on that. I know we had this discussion on the one-time funding. You remember, kind of pre-COVID, we were looking at about a $1.2 million surplus beyond our surplus that we had to allocate. And even then, though, we told you, well, hold on, let's just get your priorities. We'll have it, but we can't give you the total until we get a little closer to the end of the year. Of course, we don't know what's happening. Then the COVID the issue hit us. Now, again, most of the year is still going to be almost pre-COVID collections most of the year, but we'll still accrue money back a little bit. So really, we're only going to have about 1 month of probably COVID numbers on revenue that might help us, but those won't be until June, and it won't be on the 1st of June. It'll be sometime in June. So if the council could just be patient, we're hoping that in June we can maybe extrapolate some numbers and say, this is what we think we kind of ended up at. But the other thing I would also say is that, again, there was this discussion when we had the one-time funding about the 25% cap fund balance and whether that would increase. We still keep hearing, and at least a couple of council members said, if it does increase, then we would like to still put it over towards that. And at the time, of course, I said, well, right now, the law is the law. It's 25%. We've already maxed that. And quite frankly, this is something I pointed out before. You need to remember this too. More than likely, our revenue numbers are going to be slightly down, which means that whatever we budgeted for as 25% of the original number is going to be too high. So we're going to have to still move some numbers and money over to some possibly one-time funding. I don't know. And so it depends on how far off the cliff, how steep that cliff was that we went off. But we keep hearing that the legislature is still going to play with that, but we haven't seen it yet rise from the surface on the fund balance increase. So that may or may not be an issue. But anyway, if you'll all be patient, I think in June we can give you something that's going to be closer. I'm hoping.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman Staley. Good question. Anybody else?
And I think that's all I have, Mayor.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mayor.
Second?
I'll second that, Mayor.
Thank you, everyone. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, have a great evening. And thank you, staff, for hanging out there with us. Council, have a great evening. It's good to see y'all.
Thank you, Mayor.
Hey, Mr. Carter, you still there? I'll take it that's a no.